But before we do that, I wanted to talk to one of our favorite guests, Professor Josh Blackman. He is a constitutional law professor at South Texas College of Law, and there were quite a few fireworks on Capitol Hill today. Professor Blackman, can you first start us with the importance of Sally Yates and Jim Clapper coming before a Senate committee today? Why is that important to me?
Well, this is important because it goes to the heart of what President Trump knew about Russia, right? Did he know that Michael Flynn, who was his advisor for national security, had these connections with the Russians? And throughout the argument today, we had something of a conflict because the Trump administration said one thing, and then the Yates and Clapper said something else. So there's definitely this tension between what Trump said and what people think. Why is this important? The reason why this is important is, did Trump actually know that this guy Flynn had connections with the Ruskies? What did he actually know?
Before we do that, Professor Josh Blackman, who is Jim Clapper?
Jim Clapper is the Director of National Intelligence, and he supervises the vast intelligence community in our government. And Sally Yates was the basically acting Attorney General in the first week of the Trump presidency. Before Jeff Sessions was confirmed, there was an Obama holdover, and she was in the office. And apparently she said that she warned the White House that this guy Flynn had connections with the Russians and that he was compromised.
And that's important. Why?
To the extent that Flynn had connections with Russians, he may have made promises or he may have disclosed any sort of information with them about our national security decisions. He was only there for an office for a couple weeks, but it's unclear what sort of compromised materials may have been done during that period.
I want to, we have a minute left in this segment. Can you hold with us?
Of course.
All right, to set the stage, we have an update on Corinne Brown and her case. We have an update on the state of Texas and what's being called the toughest anti-sanctuary cities state law that has been passed across the country. It's been a brewing political issue in Texas that some cities have declared themselves sanctuary cities. We don't have a Democrat, not one, at the statewide level. The Republican Party has been expected to clamp down on illegal immigration to the extent that it is possible in the state of Texas. It's what the vast majority of voters want. We can argue outside of Texas, but within the state of Texas, this is a key political issue. And it was time that the Republicans do something, and lo and behold, they did. We'll talk about those things. We'll talk with Professor Josh Blackman. And for those of you who are deer hunters, a crazy little story out of San Marcos where for the first time ever, there's photographic evidence of a deer appearing to eat part of human remains. They're supposed to be herbivores. Got a good show for you. Hang tight. Coming up.
Where we binge thinkers pop our tops. This is the Michael Berry Show.
Sir Josh Blackman is our guest. Before we have him on, a tense exchange between Senator Ted Cruz and Sally Yates. Sally Yates, you'll recall, coming a holdover from the Obama administration. And there was a tense time where she is acting attorney general before Sessions could be approved, and then there were some issues regarding all of this. But this has been described at length online. Liberals are saying that Sally Yates handed it to Ted Cruz. You decide.
And if an attorney general disagrees with a policy decision of the president, a policy decision that is lawful, does the attorney general have the authority to direct the Department of Justice to defy the president's order?
I don't know whether the attorney general has the authority to do that or not, but I don't think it would be a good idea. And that's not what I did in this case.
Well, are you familiar with 8 U.S.C. Section 1182?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Well, it is the binding statutory authority for the executive order that you refused to implement and that led to your termination. So it certainly is a relevant and not a terribly obscure statute. By the express text of the statute, it says, quote, whenever the president finds that the entry of any alien or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may, by proclamation and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem appropriate. Would you agree that that is broad statutory authorization?
I would, and I am familiar with that, and I'm also familiar with an additional provision of the INA that says no person shall receive preference or be discriminated against in issuance of a visa because of race, nationality, or place of birth. That, I believe, was promulgated after the statute that you just quoted. And that's been part of the discussion with the courts with respect to the INA, is whether this more specific statute trumps the first one that you just described. But my concern was not an INA concern here. It rather was a constitutional concern, whether or not this the executive order here violated the Constitution, specifically with the Establishment Clause and equal protection and due process.
There is no doubt the arguments you laid out are arguments that we can expect litigants to bring, partisan litigants who disagree with the policy decision of the president. I would note on January 27th, 2017, the Department of Justice issued an official legal decision, a determination by the Office of Legal Counsel, that the executive order, and I'll quote from the opinion, the proposed order is approved with respect to form and legality. That's a determination from OLC on January 27th that it was legal. 3 days later, you determined, using your own words, that although OLC had opined on legality, it had not addressed whether it was, quote, wise or just.
And I also, in that same directive, Senator, said that I was not convinced it was lawful. I also made the point that the Office of OLC looks purely at the face of the document and, again, makes a determination as to whether there is some set of circumstances under which some portion of that EO would be enforceable, would be lawful. They importantly do not look outside the face of the document. And in this particular instance, particularly where we were talking about a fundamental issue of religious freedom, not the interpretation of some arcane statute, but religious freedom, it was appropriate for us to look at the intent behind the president's actions, and the intent is laid out in his statements.
Final, very brief question. In the over 200 years of the Department of Justice history, are you aware of any instance in which the Department of Justice has formally approved the legality of a policy and 3 days later the Attorney General has directed the department not to follow that policy and to defy that policy?
I'm not, but I'm also not aware of a situation where the Office of Legal Counsel was advised not to tell the Attorney General about it until after it was over.
Thank you, Ms. Yates. I would note that might be the case if there's reason to suspect partisanship.
Professor Josh Blackman, what just happened?
Well, Twitter, I think, as usual, is jumping over Ted Cruz for liberal reasons. Cruz asked her about whether the president had the authority by statute to exclude people. She totally didn't answer the question. She actually said she didn't even know what that statute was. She did. Instead, she was speaking about another statute which concerns visas. There's a difference between denying someone entry and granting them a visa. So the response that Yates gave was largely non-responsive. But then Cruz asked her, I think, an even more important question. Has it ever happened that, the Justice Department approved a policy and then a couple of days later the Attorney General decided not to defend it? And her answer was basically no. Why? Well, she said, I'm looking at Donald Trump's campaign statements and statements made by Rudy Giuliani, and this has convinced me that the policy is invalid, even though on its face it was valid. This is really a stunning development. The usual course when a government official doesn't want to do something is to resign. She did not resign. She basically waited to be fired. And during that period, the government failed to actually defend this order in court, which left Donald Trump in a very tough spot. He had to, as he loves to do, fire her. So no, this is not Sally Yates totally schooling Ted Cruz. I think she was somewhat non-responsive. She had prepared answers, and she ducked the question.
But, Professor, isn't she, as a member of the executive branch, effectively working for Donald Trump, the chief executive, isn't she trying to take on the role of being a member of the judiciary in determining whether what he's done is constitutional or not, when she really doesn't have that authority. She has the authority to follow the order or resign from her position, right?
Well, every government official takes an oath to the Constitution, and the Supreme Court does not have monopoly on deciding what is constitutional. So if Yates decided that this order was invalid, she had one choice and one choice alone: quit, resign, and let someone else make the decision for her. But her action was very selfish. She decided to stick around the job for a few days and refused to allow the agency to defend this policy. This is where she greatly erred.
And that's where he was within his authority in firing her.
Absolutely.
So why are we still arguing over this?
She insists she did nothing wrong. In fact, she's getting all these awards from these various progressive groups. She did nothing brave. It was only by the happenstance that the Senate took forever to confirm Jeff Sessions as Attorney General that she was still in the office. In years past, the Attorney General was confirmed on day number 1. It took Sessions a few weeks to be confirmed. And as a result of this foot dragging, Trump issued this order without his full government in place. He didn't have all of his officers in line. And as a result, he was relying on Obama-appointed officials to actually defend these policies, which was simply not going to happen.
Fair enough. I still don't understand why we're discussing this when it doesn't appear to still be relevant. Nobody's trying to get her job back or make a payment to her for having been fired. So whether or not she was right to do so or not, I just don't understand the relevance other than scoring political points on both sides. But we'll take up that issue. And Sally Yates says that she warned the Trump White House about Michael Flynn, and we know about the problems with him. Why that's important. Professor, you can stay with us?
Of course.
Professor Josh Blackman, constitutional law professor at South Texas College of Law, coming up next.
Secondly, we told him we felt like
because of his association with. Back to the issue of Sally Yates. Today, she says she warned the White House that Michael Flynn was a blackmail risk because of his association with foreign governments.
the first thing we did was to explain to Mr. McGahn that the underlying conduct that General Flynn had engaged in was problematic in and of itself. Secondly, we told him we felt like the vice president and others were entitled to know that the information that they were conveying to the American people wasn't true. And we wanted to make it really clear right out of the gate that we were not accusing Vice President Pence of knowingly providing false information to the American people. And in fact, Mr. McGahn responded back to me to let me know that anything that General Flynn would have said would have been based, anything that Vice President Pence would have said would have been based on what General Flynn had told him. We told him the third reason is because we were concerned that the American people had been misled about the underlying conduct and what General Flynn had done. And additionally, that we weren't the only ones that knew all of this, that the Russians also knew about what General Flynn had done, and the Russians also knew that General Flynn had misled the vice president and others. Because in the media accounts, it was clear from the vice president and others that they were repeating what General Flynn had told them, and that this was a problem because not only did we believe that the Russians knew this, but that they likely had proof of this information. And that created a compromise situation, a situation where the national security advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians. Finally, we told them that we were giving them all of this information so that they could take action, the action that they deemed appropriate. I remember that Mr. McGahn asked me whether or not General Flynn should be fired, and I told him that that really wasn't our call, that was up to them, but that we were giving them this information so that they could take action.
Professor Josh Blackman, South Texas College of Law, what do you make of this? Why is this important?
The reason why it's important is if there hadn't been leaks about Flynn, he may still be employed. And if he was still employed, it could be the fact that the Russians could blackmail the head of our U.S. intelligence system. That's a very serious threat. And the related concern is that the Trump administration knew that Flynn could have been blackmailed, and they didn't take the appropriate steps to remove him from office until this got leaked to the public. This morning, Donald got on Twitter and was saying, "Ask Yates who leaked this and who leaked that." Yates denied leaking it, and who knows who put it to the newspapers. But the fact is, until this was leaked, there was no movement to actually get rid of him.
Whether it should have been leaked or not, whether that leads to the greater good, my understanding is that Vice President Pence, leaving President Trump out of this, was angry that he had been lied to by Flynn, and that it was Pence who put the hammer down and said, if this man is lying to me about who's paying him, the Turks or the Soviet or the Russians or any other foreign government, I can't go out and in good faith attest to the fact that he's above reproach, right? This was Pence that drove this.
Exactly right, Michael. The fact of the matter is Flynn misled Pence, and this is actually when things started to come off the wheels. The vice president had made some public statements about Flynn based on what he was told, and once Pence found out that he was lied to, that became a ground by itself to move for firing of Flynn. Flynn should have disclosed this much earlier, and the fact that he didn't is very, very, very troubling for he was our top security advisor.
He was also a top official in the Obama administration, or he'd been brought in under the Obama administration.
Right, and he had been promoted since then to national security advisor. So it's unclear when he was vetted for the Obama administration position if he'd had these contacts and what sort of foreign connections he had. A lot of this is still coming out and is not entirely known what the details are.
One moment. White House confirms Obama warning on Flynn that he wasn't a fan. Obama's been trying to repair his image and saying, I told President Trump this guy's a bad guy. Listen to this.
President Obama warned then President-elect Trump against hiring Mike Flynn as his national security advisor. Why did he ignore that warning?
Well, the president doesn't disclose details of meetings that he has, which in this case was an hour-long meeting, but it's true that President Obama made it known that he wasn't exactly a fan of General Flynn's, which is frankly shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, that given that General Flynn had worked for President Obama, was an outspoken critic of President Obama's shortcomings, specifically as it related to his lack of strategy confronting ISIS and other threats around that were facing America. So the question that you have to ask yourself really is, if President Obama was truly concerned about General Flynn, why didn't he suspend General Flynn's security clearance, which they had just reapproved months earlier? Additionally, why did the Obama administration let Flynn go to Russia for a paid speaking engagement and receive a fee? I mean, there were steps that they could have taken that, if that was truly a concern, more than just a person that had bad blood.
Whether Obama behaved in the best manner or not, Professor Blackman, this doesn't look good for President Trump, that he continued to stand behind him, knowing some of the things that are now clear he knew, right?
Yeah, this doesn't make Trump look good. For a period of maybe a week or two, Trump knew stuff was going on, and the guy wasn't fired until this blew up in the press. And this raises fair questions about Trump's loyalty to people. Was he so loyal to Flynn that he was willing to look past this? And if so, during this 2-week period, did the Russians get any intelligence that we have? Did they compromise Flynn? Because he had a lot of information. And these hearings are not making the Trump administration look good. I mean, I've been on your show a couple times now since January, and the very first month of the Trump administration was very chaotic. And this is one of several episodes where things were flying one after the other with the travel ban, with Yates, with this and that. I think for the most part, the administration has settled into something of a calm rhythm in the last month or so. Mm-hmm. But this very first few weeks, Michael, were absolutely insane. And fortunately now Trump seems to be at least getting good advice. But at the beginning, he was acting rogue.
Professor, can you hold with me?
Of course.
Let's talk about the next round of judicial appointments and Donald Trump's opportunity to shape the American judiciary with Professor Josh Blackman coming up.
The Michael Berry Show.
Professor, Trump just tweeted, Sally Yates said nothing but old news. Is that true?
Yes. And for those listening home, Michael Twitter messaged me 30 seconds before going on air saying, "Can I call you now?" So, agent my ass. Um, Trump's tweet is accurate. Yates didn't give us anything new. She merely repeated what she wrote in a letter before she was fired. About back in January, and the stuff that she said was more or less the same stuff that was in these leaks in the press. So this was mostly political theater, as most hearings are. But the fact is, you did confirm some stuff that was in the media that is troubling.
I'm going to go beyond that issue, beyond even legal, to a little more political, come legal. Trump tweeted, "No evidence of collusion with Russia and Trump." Dianne Feinstein over the weekend basically confirming the same. Is this issue done?
I doubt these things are ever done, Michael. We don't know what was actually compromised during that 2-week period, but this is more of the cover-up is worse than the actual bad deed. We've heard this since Nixon. And I think this will be used to go after Trump over and over again about the Russians. It doesn't even matter what the Russians did, even if they did nothing. The fact is that the Russians are there, and there's this red scare for Trump that will keep popping up over and over again.
President Trump is set to appoint about 10 individuals to the judiciary. I know if anyone has reviewed those resumes and the likely nominees, it's you. What are your thoughts on this batch?
Solid, man. These are solid judges. One of the most longest-lasting impacts a president can make on the federal judiciary is through appointments to the courts. These are lifetime appointments. And the people that he's picked for these 10 or so slots are excellent. You have, from Michigan, Joan Larson. She's a Michigan Supreme Court justice. You have David Strass from Minnesota. But one omission that breaks my heart, Justice Don Willett, our own Texas Supreme Court justice, is not on the list. The rumor, and this is the rumor, is that there's a lot of infighting between Senator Cornyn and Governor Abbott over whom to pick. So this is all politics is local. And
which of them wants Willett?
Neither, apparently. They have their own preferred guys. This has been in the New York Times and in a couple other sources, so I'm not giving any inside information. But Senator Cornyn is backing, apparently, a judge in Dallas, a very good judge, Reed O'Connor, who is an alum of my law school. And Governor Abbott is also backing one of his top aides, who's also a wonderful guy, Andy Oldham, who's one of his advisors. And there are currently only 2 vacancies in Texas. So it's strange that in a state with such a strong legal conservative presence that you have such talent, and there's only 2 spots. But my hope is that sooner or later, Donnie will get his way into a federal court. And I think we'll be proud. But all the people Trump is about to pick are solid. And for those people who are worried that Trump would not appoint good judges, this is a very good first list.
That's a good thing. Supreme Court nominee, Supreme Court justice, current Supreme Court justice, most likely to step down during Donald Trump's first term.
Anthony Kennedy. There have been rumors after rumors saying that Justice Kennedy has served as long as he wants. I think he's been 81 years old, and that he may actually step down at the end of this term. If that happens, we're going thermonuclear because the Scalia for Gorsuch swap was somewhat of a 1-to-1. If Trump can pick someone to swap out for Kennedy and put on a conservative, maybe Justice Willett, who knows, then we actually shift the balance of the court in a way that will stay for maybe 20, 30 years. So this is a very, very big deal. And if Justice Kennedy decides to retire, and just for one small data point, Anthony Kennedy's son actually worked on the Trump transition team. So they actually have some relationships. In fact, Justice Kennedy invited Ivanka and her kids to the Supreme Court for an argument. So, you wouldn't think that the Trumps and the Kennedys would have anything in common, but apparently they have some sort of simpatico going.
But Kennedy would be doing Republicans a favor by stepping down and allowing Trump that appointment, that nomination.
I don't think Justice Kennedy can make up for his decades of rulings from the bench, but this would go a long way to helping.
Fourth Circuit today hearing oral arguments in the travel ban case. That's not a Muslim travel ban. It's a geographic region travel ban. What did we learn from that today?
Well, I think with President Clinton, his presidency boiled down to the meaning of the word is. With Trump, it boils down to the meaning of the word that. When Trump signed this ban, he looked at the cameras and said, "We all know what that means." Okay, what's that? The ACLU says, "Well, that means Trump was trying to do a secret Muslim ban." And the government says, no, that means he's trying to protect us from dangerous people. And so I think this case boils down to a judicial Rorschach test, right? If you look at Trump's statement, is he trying to exclude Muslims, or is he trying to promote national security? And the judges in the Court of Appeals grappled with that question at some length today, right? Do we look at this case like a normal president, or do we look at this case because Donald Trump is insane? And a lot of these judges seem to believe that Donald Trump is unworthy of the usual form of deference that presidents ought to get because of some of the things he said.
But does it really matter? I mean, what Barack Obama said in front of one group, and the accent he used, and what he said in front of another group, shouldn't we look at the four corners of the document and judge it on that?
Michael, that's exactly right. In fact, at some points, the judges were asking if President Clinton, right, had signed the exact same four corners, exact same document, would it have been valid? And eventually, the lawyer for the ACLU said probably it would be valid. This is entirely based on the sorts of dumb things Trump has said on Twitter, on the campaign trail. And there's frankly no precedent for looking at these external statements to override the facial policy that we have before us.
Well, and when you start doing things like that, you think of President Bush, the elder, 41, saying no new taxes, and then signs a tax increase. I mean, you do things on the campaign trail, you make campaign promises, but for that to enter into a legal order, an executive order, I find that a very troubling precedent.
It's beyond troubling, because if you think about it, Michael, Donald Trump is now tainted. And if every action he ever takes that affects Muslims is tainted, the courts can intervene. Imagine if at one point we engage in military action against, let's say, Syria, right? And then some crazy group files a lawsuit and says, wait a minute, this is motivated because he hates Muslims. Look at what he said in the campaign trail. Oh, it's a hate crime, and let a court stop our bombing runs. This is Kookyville, right? This is crazy. And at the very end of the oral argument, the lawyer for the Trump administration gave a warning. He said that the precedents set by this case in reviewing the president's power will long transcend this debate and this constitutional moment. Right? This is not just about resisting Trump, although that's what the resistance thinks. This is setting real rules that will constrain presidents for decades to come.
Professor,
and
thank you for being our guest.
Thank you, Michael.
Great guest. Follow him on Twitter, Josh M. Blackman. He's famous for the Fantasy SCOTUS hashtag. You can learn about it online.